Hey, I'm Christine Stoddard. I'm the creator of Abuela, Queen of Nightmares, and this is a stage play that somehow has found a whole new life on YouTube. It's not at all what I would have expected, but I'm not mad. So, Abuela, Queen of Nightmares actually started as a poetry book. Yeah. And then I had enough people who just loved it and said, hey, this is super visual. This is super performative. Like, I can see the main character telling her story because the poems were narrative. They were all linked, right? And if you're not familiar with the play yet, if you're not one of the 53, almost 54,000 people who have watched this filmed stage play on my YouTube, then hey, here's what you should know about the story. The story is that there's a young woman, Salvadoran-American, growing up in Phoenix, Arizona, and she has no idea why her mom just worships her dead mother. So her grandmother, the main character's grandmother. It's a mystery to her. And throughout the course of the play, we see the tension between mother and daughter, the old world and the new world, right? El Salvador and the United States, the immigrant mom and the child of an immigrant. And eventually we find out why it is there's this rupture between them. And it all has to do with family tragedy and trauma. But don't worry, there are cacti and jaguars and owls, all sorts of visions that show that fantasy can be a coping mechanism. So the play, I turned the poetry book into a play. I just rewrote it as a stage play, trying to think of how to make this something that could be performed using more than one actor. And that was all done during my time at the City College of New York. Shout out CUNY. I just spent time rewriting, picturing, imagining, and coming up with a script. I submitted it. It won this national competition from Table Work Press, and it was supposed to have some kind of live event, some kind of minimalist staging at the very least. But because I won in early 2020 and all of that live event stuff was set to go down in spring 2020, you can probably guess what happened. And the answer is nothing. Nothing happened with the project. Total standstill. Yeah, like the rest of the world. Theater was on hold. So I just sat on it. You know, I definitely had my daydreams of what this play was going to look like once the world reopened. And by the time that finally came around, Table Work Press was out of the picture. They had published the play in a book with another award-winning play, and that was it. They, like a lot of theater companies, theater nonprofits, were just done. They needed to totally figure out who they were going to be in this post-pandemic world. And that gave me a new opportunity to think about how I was going to make Abuela, Queen of Nightmares something audiences could come see. Now, during this time in 2021, things were still a little strange, to put it mildly. You had a lot of places reopen and then close again because there were spikes in COVID. You had just so many logistical nightmares, frankly, lots of stops and starts, right? But I was lucky enough to work on this play called Case Closed, and it was based on Dorian Corey. She was a Harlem drag performer in the 1960s who became infamous when her dead lover was found mummified in a closet in the 90s. Yeah. So that play was A way for me to get back into theater for live audiences, not just on Zoom, because that's what all of us have been doing, Zoom, 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 during quarantine. And I learned a lot. I really, really did, including how to put on my play at the historic Jean Frankel Theater. I had shadowed Lawrence Schwartz, who was the director. I learned a lot from the producer / playwright, Scott Jones. And I was ready. I had my grant. I had the money to do it. And I just wanted to go. Now, you're probably wondering why. Yeah, why? Because a lot of theater makers after the pandemic just gave up. And I'm not going to say, oh, it's because they were weak, because they didn't have it in them, because they were going to fall out of the game, pull out of the game eventually, right? No, I don't think that's the case. I think people were traumatized, and it's not fair to judge people for decisions that they made based on survival. People had to pivot. People had to make money. People had to do something to put food on the table. And if that meant that they couldn't participate in theater anymore, then I get it. I think you need to come from a place of a lot of privilege to not have any empathy for that kind of situation. And I do have a lot of privilege. I really do. I am not a trust fund baby, but I was pretty fortunate during quarantine because I was able to keep working. I lost work for sure, all kinds of opportunities, all kinds of commissions, not going to lie about that. But I had clients that let me keep working during that time. Trust, they were not all theater clients for sure, but different kinds of nonprofit arts clients, different marketing clients, journalism clients, kept me afloat. And if it hadn't been for my digital skills that let me continue doing work remotely, if I hadn't gotten super creative about how to do some of my in-person work socially distanced, then no, I would not be one of those artists who kept making during quarantine. I would have been starving. I would have been desperate. But that wasn't me. In November 2021, I had just finished working on Case Closed with Scott Jones and Lawrence Schwartz, and I was revving to go with mi Abuela. I was like, okay, I see logistically what it takes to make my play happen because I just put on a play that in a lot of ways is at a similar scale as the play I want to put on. So I took what I had learned at the Broadway Comedy Club before the pandemic when I was working with Beverly Bonner, one of my mentors who unfortunately died. Just have to, shift in my chair because this is emotional for me. Beverly Bonner was one of my mentors. She taught me how to produce in New York City as an independent writer and performer. She really showed me the business side of things when she didn't have to. And sure, I could have guessed some of it. I'm a smart person. But she took me under her wing. And she made it so that I didn't have to try and fail in the same way. I mean, of course, I've tried and I've failed. That's part of having a creative career, is experimenting and figuring out what works and what doesn't. But I had an in at the Broadway Comedy Club as somebody who never went to theater school, hadn't any kind of comedy training at that point. Because of Beverly, I knew how to produce a show at a theater district venue in New York fucking City because she believed in me. So I was able to combine what she taught me before she passed away, not from COVID. No, I won't get into it because I don't think it's actually public information. Maybe at some point I'll be cleared to share that, but not now. She died from not COVID during the pandemic, and she'd already been dead a year by the time I signed my contract with the Gene Frankel Theater. So I'd had a year of more than a year of closed New York City, the shutdown, of doing Zoom plays, of reading a ton about social media, reading a ton about ticketing on Eventbrite, and working on an off-Broadway show at the Gene Frankel Theater, Case Closed. I had all of that to meld together and bring me Abuela, Queen of Nightmares, to life. So the contract was for 10 performances in June 2022. And that meant that I had several months to plan and pray that New York City was going to stay open for theater, that COVID wasn't going to shut it down again. And that's what happened. It did stay open. I did not have to freak out about COVID. I did worry a little bit. There were sanitation precautions in place. My intern and I would disinfect things during our rehearsals, after our rehearsals, and just like use common sense, have a lot of hand sanitizer everywhere, make sure that people weren't snacking on things and sharing stuff without washing their hands. Masking when appropriate. We did have a COVID scare. I can't remember all the particulars during the rehearsal process. I was like, fuck, we better take this seriously. And all of this was because putting on this play meant so much to me. It's very loosely based on some family history about my own grandmother and my family's connection to El Salvador and the brutal civil war there. I actually didn't get to go to El Salvador, which is my mother's home country, until I was a full-grown adult. And I've actually not visited with her. I visited with my sibling, who's a couple years younger than I am, but we've never ever taken a family trip there. And there was a shocking discovery that I made about my grandmother's life that inspired the play. There's a lot of trauma that we don't talk about often enough as children of immigrants because there's not a wide space for it. There are smaller, more intimate places, but it's not something that's mainstream enough. So there's not this broader empathy for it. But it can be really hard as an American-born person to relate to your family members who were born in other countries and to understand some of what they experienced before they came here. There's just so much trauma that comes from war and poverty and climate change. Climate disasters affect developing countries differently than they do developed countries. That's just a fact. You look at where hurricanes and earthquakes have the most devastating effects in this world, and it is definitely in the poorest countries and black and brown countries, and that's because of the effects of colonialism. There are just so many issues in the global south, and that doesn't mean that people in the global south need rescuing, right? Like the white savior complex is a whole issue. But there are challenges that have been made even harder because of colonization, because of Americanization, because of Europeanification, Westernization of places that never asked for any of those things and in many ways actively resisted them. Definitely the case of the Civil War in El Salvador, which is a place that deals with major earthquakes and hurricanes that have ruined a lot of people's lives just in terms of basic survival. And that's not even to talk about the emotional effects, right? Of what it's like to lose everything material. I can't relate to that, not firsthand, but trauma can be intergenerational, and things that your family experienced the generation before you or the generation before them, that trauma has an impact on you. It doesn't just go away. It's something that's passed down. It's a fucked up inheritance. And sure, you can say, oh, it makes you stronger. It makes you who you are. It's one of the reasons why I wrote this play that affected so many people. In person at the Jean Frankel Theater, in person at the Tank after it won the core production grant there and was restaged there, directed by Fiamma Piacentini, who had been in the original at Jean Frankel Theater. That's why so many people on YouTube have watched this weird experimental play. It is not by any means like a Broadway musical. It's no jukebox musical, but it's resonated with people. And what people have told me over and over again about why it's affected them so much, why they were drawn to the play, is that emotional power, is that relationship between mother and daughter and mother and granddaughter, grandmother and granddaughter, these three generations of women, and how, yeah, I mean, family trauma is something that I think every person can understand. Some people have more firsthand experience with it than others. Some people have empathy for it, even if it's not something that's a big presence in their own family. And yeah, I mean, tensions between mothers and daughters, that's something else that so many people can relate to. It is very universal. So there's a lot of cultural stuff that might be more specific to Salvadorans and Salvadoran-Americans, or American Salvadorans, as I've been told, is might be a more accurate description for myself. American Salvadoran versus Salvadoran-American. Yeah, I wanted to make sure, though, that the darkness of the play didn't completely override the fantastical elements, the moments for levity. There is a lot of magic in this play in one way or another, and there's playfulness, there's some humor. I think that even dramatic pieces should have comedy. Maybe, you know, there are different forms of comedy, but just places where you can laugh or at least smile. I wanted to have that in Mi Abuela, Queen of Nightmares when I directed it myself at the Jean Frankel Theater, and then when Fiamma directed it. And I'm so glad that I chose her because she understood that. Now, the person who filmed the play, the version that's gotten so popular on YouTube, is Jacob Barron. And Jacob is a friend from my Broadway Comedy Club days. He also worked with Beverly Bonner, so we have that connection. That's where we met. And he was cast, passive tense, I cast him as the father and sheriff figure in the play at Jean Frankel. There's a duality that's really, really, really well described in the Thinking Theater NYC review of the show. There's a duality between the sheriff and the father. And Jacob is an actor, but he's also a talented filmmaker, and we collaborate on other film projects together. Right now, he helps me shoot some of those funny man on the street interviews that you see on this channel. If you watched Mother Nature is So Hot, he shot that. Or the Election Day Fairy video, he shot that too. A more involved commitment is Don't Mind If I Don't, which is a TV show that I run with Aaron Gold. Aaron founded it. It's his project, first and foremost, and I help make it happen. But Jacob shoots and edits that show, and Jacob has shot and edited so many other projects of mine, like Her Garden, which is also very popular here on YouTube. It's an experimental feature film that we made with Megan Meehan. The point is, I chose Jake to shoot this play because I knew he could do it in a cinematic manner. We do have like straight documentation of the play, you know, no moving camera, just camera on sticks, as they say in the biz. But I wanted something that was more dynamic. I was really taken with how Disney shot Hamilton and how it is cinematic, how you really don't have to be in a theater to enjoy that musical. I never saw the musical in person. I've only seen the Disney Plus version, and I enjoyed it because they shot it in a way that made sense for screen. They weren't just like, here, let's document this. No. And with Jake, I knew that when I said I need this shot cinematically, he was going to get it. He was not just going to document it. We already had that. We needed a version of this play that somebody who never got to see it in person, would never see it in person, could still watch and feel like they had a fulfilling experience. So he shot it. We did it one day that we didn't have a performance at the Jean Frankel Theater. Had all the cast available for that. Had our lighting designer, Jeremy Stein, available for that. Really, everybody, all hands on deck to make sure that we could film it. And it's not a Hollywood production, right? It's shot in an experimental style, which makes sense because it's an experimental play. Off-Broadway, weird. But that's all we needed, and it worked. And that's why people are still watching it on YouTube. That video was part of what got the project the core production grant at the Tank, and how we got a budget of $40K to produce the show in Midtown Manhattan in 2023. Look, I was a part, still technically am, of the BMI Musical Theater Writing Workshop. I've been a part of lots of different creative writing and playwriting groups. I know lots of playwrights never get to see their work produced. Lots of playwrights It's the same thing with screenwriters. Write things that just live on their laptop. Maybe they print it out and they have a hard copy of the script, but it never becomes a play. It never becomes a movie. And with Mi Abuela, Queen of Nightmares, it was too important for me to just have that live as a poetry book. Even that was something I realized, like, after I wrote the poetry book and all these people were encouraging me, I was like, this cannot just be an obscure book of poems. I need more people to know this story. And how do you bring art to people? Frankly, with literature, you need to make it a play or a movie because people want to be entertained. People want a spectacle. And I've learned that, sure, there are different levels of spectacle, and there are shows that are almost pure spectacle and have almost no substance, but people would rather watch than read. That's just where we are in society today. And that can be a tough pill to swallow, as they say, for writers, because writers love books. I grew up adoring books, but I've learned, as someone who has published books, that I can have a bigger impact with theater and with movies. People will watch something that they will never, ever read. So with Mi Abuela, I had to be smart about the budget. I wanted to convey the poetics of the original story. I worked with artist Dario Moore to realize some of the scenic design at the Jean Frankel, and I did the rest because I do have visual arts experience too. So whatever he wasn't able to do, I did. And then at the Tank, Fiamma and I worked closely with Rodrigo Escalante, who was the set designer there. I made all the props, lots of paper mache stuff to reference the paper mache culture in El Salvador, just lots of handmade objects. And yeah, the end result is something that is a little DIY, and it is experimental. It's not supposed to be slick. But I think that for this story, you don't need any of that. It's about the heart. It's about the concept. It's about the poetry. And I use this as a model for all of my future work, all the work that I've done since that point, all of my bigger, more ambitious projects. And yeah, I have projects that aren't as weird. They're more mainstream. I have projects that are more comedic, projects that are more Americanized. But it was really important for me to express what I had to express in this story and get it out there. So if you haven't watched it on YouTube, you should watch it on YouTube. Why not? It's free and you're here anyway. Thanks for listening to my monologue. Bye.